Aftershocks continue in Southern California as residents assess the damage. We'll show you the city that took the brunt of it. Police in Richmond go on a massive sweep tonight in a crackdown on illegal weapons and drugs. A report out today tells us exactly why the Cypress structure fell in the quake of '89. It may have been as few as 2 freeway columns that failed. 6.5 years ago, the city of Coalinga changed forever, and residents are still haunted by memories of that earth-shattering experience. We'll have a special report. Those stories, all the news on this Thursday night, March 1st, 1990.
Live from Channel 2 and first in the Bay Area, this is the award-winning 10 o'clock news, the #1 primetime newscast in the country.
Good evening. I'm Elaine Corral. Dennis Richmond is on vacation. It's been one aftershock after another in Southern California today, and as we remember only too well, aftershocks are right up there as one of life's most nerve-rattling experiences. In some cases, the aftershocks measuring more than 2.3 have been hitting within minutes or seconds of each other. And while the shaking continues, the damage is still being assessed. Earlier today, the city of Pomona, which declared a state of emergency, estimated damage at $20 million. That estimate has now been downgraded to $10 million. But scores of homes and buildings throughout Southern California sit in structural limbo tonight. They're integrity suspect. Lloyd LaCuesta spent last night and all day today in Los Angeles County, and he shows us what that 5.5 jolt did yesterday.
On Mount Baldy, near the earthquake's epicenter, about 40 miles east of downtown Los Angeles, snowplows spent the day clearing landslides off the roads. The ground was still shaking today. Aftershocks sent more rocks rolling down the steep slopes of the San Gabriel Mountains, and people were still talking about what happened yesterday.
It sounded like a freight train right in your living room. all the mountain that you see around here, I mean, their stuff was coming down. We have one structure back in the village here that rock came off the side of the hill here, and it's about half the size of a desk, about the size of half of a desk, and it came through the guy's back wall.
The owner of the house was not home when the rock came crashing in, and he hadn't returned by today. Big boulders like this one may have persuaded mountain residents to stay in the flatlands for a while. This rock bounced before caving in part of the roadway. In the community of Laverne, a 75-foot-long brick wall of an auto supply warehouse caved in. 60 employees were inside at the time. All got out safely. $3 million of merchandise is stranded until the roof can be shored up.
The wall just kind of shook for a little bit and just started crumbling down. As you can see the way it fell there, the only thing that was holding the wall up was some bolts about 2 feet apart at the top, and of course the foundation at the bottom. And the mortar in between and the bricks was so old it just crumbled down. It just didn't fall over in a piece because there were cars even parked right here. Not one car got hit with a brick.
A home furnishing store in Upland was hard hit. Pottery broke and the showroom was still in disarray today. This store, like many in the area, did not have earthquake insurance. Damage to the store put at $40,000.
It was like a total explosion. It was louder than anything I've ever heard. Everything just was shaking. It felt like someone just picked up the whole building and just threw it down. It was incredible. It was so scary. I'm getting scared talking about it again.
While damage in this area, known as the Inland Empire, may total more than $20 million, the region was relatively unscathed. No one was seriously injured. Most of the buildings here are new. It was the older structures that took most of the beatings. No homes came off their foundations, but quite a number of brick chimneys fell. People today talked about watching television reports of the Bay Area's earthquake 5 months ago and knowing full well that all of California is quake country.
Well, anything's possible, sure. You're right in a good area for a good shaker. With the San Andreas Fault over there and then all the minor faults going along the base of the mountain up there.
It's believed this quake was centered at the juncture of the Sierra Madre and Cucamonga faults, an area peppered with seismic monitoring instruments. Scientists will now scramble all over these mountains looking for more answers that might help predict when the big one will come. While this earthquake has caused a lot of excitement here in Southern California, it really does pale in comparison to what happened in the San Francisco Bay Area on October 17th. To be specific, the Loma Prieta earthquake, seismologists say, was 60 times stronger than this one. And yet this one was strong enough to bring down boulders like this. Atop Mount Baldy in Los Angeles County, Lloyd LaCuesta for the 10 o'clock news.
In the East Bay city of Richmond tonight, a massive police operation is underway. More than 200 law enforcement officers from all over the state are participating in a sweep of West Richmond. More than 50 people have already been arrested, some being booked right now. It's a huge sweep targeting illegal drugs, weapons, and other criminal activity. Leslie Griffith is standing by in Richmond right now with a live report. Leslie.
Elaine, police say that this was the largest drug sweep in Bay Area history. So many people were arrested here tonight that police are having to book them in the Kaiser Permanente parking lot where we are right now. They're taking them by bus to jail. At least 60 suspects have been arrested so far. Just a few minutes ago, dozens more were standing in line waiting to be booked. Now, let me show you some of what went on here tonight. 230 officers descended on West Richmond with helicopters, SWAT teams, and drug-sniffing dogs. They covered 2 miles of West Richmond, and virtually everywhere you looked here tonight, someone was being searched and someone was being arrested. Now, as we show you these pictures, keep in mind that many of these people that you see here were not guilty of anything. They just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Many of them were in local bars where officers had search warrants, and they were taken out when the officers went in. There was a search warrant for the Alphas Bar, the Tampico Bar, a place called the Flashback Bar, and numerous other places. Police had already worked sting operations at many of these bars for months and said that other undercover officers had purchased narcotics there. They also raided several crack houses and prostitution rings. We're not sure at this point how much drugs or weapons were found. Police say that they will tell us that tomorrow. Now, when you look at these pictures, keep in mind that many of the people being searched are kids. They are 12, 13, 14-year-olds. That's why we aren't showing you many of their faces, but police say that many of them, these young kids, were found in local bars, some found in crack houses.
Well, what we're seeing with the pupils is we're checking for people under the influence of cocaine, which is a crime in and of itself, and there will be a number of arrests made for that. The dogs are specially trained narcotics dogs. We're going to use those in the search warrants because sometimes the people can hide narcotics in strange places, and the dogs can find that quite easily. We've got 5 narcotics dogs out here to do that.
A lot of young kids are into drugs, not no heavy drugs, they're just into light drugs and things. I mean, you ain't going to be able to stop it.
That last man, Melvin Mason, owns the Flashback Bar. That was one of the places that was raided tonight. There were ambulances standing by tonight in Richmond during the raid. Officers from Pinole, Berkeley, Contra Costa County Sheriff's Department, Albany, Richmond, officers from the Department of Corrections, the Tactical Narcotics Team, the Alcohol and Beverage Commission, El Cerrito Police, all of them were here, everybody helping. John Muir Hospital was on alert in case of emergencies, and at last count, as we said, about 60 suspects were arrested tonight. Now, one of the motivating factors behind this raid tonight was the death of a 17-year-old girl. She was shot in Richmond in January while she was standing on a street corner. Police, for the first time, have released the picture of the suspect in that murder. It is 20-year-old Stephen Dossman. He lived here in Richmond, police say, in the 1300 block of Filbert. He is wanted for murder. So, Elaine, the suspects have been arrested. They have been taken to jail by bus, and it has been anything but a quiet night here in Richmond.
Sounds like all of the arrests were without incident, Leslie?
Yes, it was very fortunate. At one point, we got a report that a young woman was having a heart attack. Police brought an ambulance in, and there was a helicopter waiting to take her away, but apparently it was not a heart attack. She was having an anxiety attack. She was seeing many of her friends getting arrested. So, other than that, it was relatively quiet.
All right, thanks very much, Leslie, for that live report. The saying, if you can't beat 'em, join 'em, might be turned around to, if you can't beat 'em, buy 'em. We're referring to a string of motels along MacArthur Boulevard in East Oakland. Police say prostitution and drug dealing are going on in those motels that are nothing more than havens for crime. But a group of Baptist ministers think they've come up with a way to turn things around. They started buying up the motels. Randy Shandobil reports.
A drive along MacArthur Boulevard in East Oakland can be an eye-opening experience. Clusters of people hanging out in front of countless run-down motels.
From 106th to 23rd Avenue on MacArthur, it's probably about 25 to 30 motels. And I say 95% of the motels that's on MacArthur is used for prostitution, drugs.
There was a time when this boulevard was a main thoroughfare for travelers going up and down the state. Back then, families used the motels. But when the MacArthur Freeway was built in the 1960s, all the travelers started speeding on by. And the dealers and hookers meandered on in. So a year ago, the minister at the Greater Emmanuel Baptist Church at 94th and MacArthur came up with an idea that suddenly seems to be catching on. The church borrowed some Oakland redevelopment money to buy the Empire Motel next door and convert it to drug-free, low-income housing. The plan is working so well that yesterday, a union of Baptist ministers borrowed more money to buy and convert the Suncrest Motel across the street. And the ministers plan to buy more motels soon.
We will not eliminate it totally, but at least we can bring it down to a minimum.
The ministers plan to repay the loans from rent money collected from the tenants, about $400 a month. The rooms are designed as temporary housing. Counseling is part of the deal.
They're having hard times out in society. They can come here, they can have affordable rent, their utilities are paid, they can work or go to school, get themselves on their feet, and then go.
I lost my job, so I lost my place, and the church has taken me in, and they've been very helpful for me. I've really turned my life over. I was a cocaine, marijuana user, and they have completely turned my life around.
Better environment. My kids get outside and play now. They sure do.
City officials know they'll have to come up with a lot of redevelopment money to clean up all the motels, about $500,000 to $1 million apiece. But they say it's possible within 10 years.
Everything you do is going to be risky, and we're willing to assume the risk because we think the benefits outweigh the risk.
83 blocks is a long stretch of road to clean up, but now there's a start. In Oakland, Randy Shandobil for the 10 o'clock news.
In News of the World tonight, in the city of Srinagar in the Kashmir region of India, government troops opened fire on nearly 1 million Muslim protesters today. At least 60 people were killed and dozens of others wounded. This was the worst violence in the mostly Muslim region since the secession movement began 2 years ago. The violence started when hundreds of thousands of people poured into Srinagar to demand independence from India. In Egypt, a fire fed by strong winds swept through a luxury hotel in Cairo early this morning and burned for 9 hours. 16 people died, including one American. 70 others were injured. The fire broke out in a tent in a restaurant attached to the Sheraton Hotel. High winds quickly spread the smoke and embers throughout the hotel. There were no sprinklers or fire alarms. Egyptian law does not require them, although most hotels are equipped with such safety devices. And across Ethiopia, some 4 million people are facing starvation. Unlike 1984, the cause this time is not drought and famine, but a civil war. In the last few weeks, tens of thousands of grain and other relief supplies and trucks have been destroyed in a battle for a port city. Relief agencies are now asking various rebel groups to help get the supplies to the starving people since the government has been unable to provide any help. Straight ahead on the 10 o'clock news, a Texas court passes judgment on skinheads accused of racially motivated attacks. And a threatened bus strike could make it tough on Bay Area commuters tomorrow morning. We'll be right back. In the days after Northern California's October 17th earthquake last year, there were many questions on the minds of Bay Area residents, and certainly one of the biggest was this. Why should a freeway some 60 miles from the epicenter collapse? Well, today, what may be the definitive answer to that question finally emerged. 42 people died in the collapse of the Nimitz Freeway Cypress structure. And today, after months of study, experts agreed that they now know exactly what failed and why. Gary Kauf reports.
The Cypress structure, moments after last October's devastating quake. This is one of the hundreds of rebar-reinforced concrete columns that held the structure up. And this is one of the weak spots in those columns, the spot. This weakly designed joint, engineers said for the first time today, failed on 2 or more columns and caused the Cypress to collapse.
That's where the failure began, at the bottom of the upper column, and that once the concrete began to fall away from the structure, the structure lost its bearing strength and everything came down.
It was kind of doomed if a big earthquake came along, yes. It had many characteristics that would lead to failure.
That was one of the revelations that came out this morning at a hearing held by the Governor's Board of Inquiry on the Loma Prieta quake. Using fancy three-dimensional graphics and some of the world's most powerful computers, the state's foremost engineers and theorists explained what happened to the Cypress, why, and how to keep it from happening somewhere else again. Among other things, engineers say they now know at least 2 columns must have given way, because one chunk of freeway in the middle survived. Hence, it couldn't have been just one long domino effect. And what was the weakness in design? The rebar inside the concrete columns was not wrapped with more rebar around it. A film on the construction of the Cypress also verifies that.
Though the structure had substantial strength, it was quite brittle, and that, I think, is one of the keys in bringing the structure down.
Then there's the issue of unstable land. This map shows the Oakland shoreline in 1894. The sections of the Cypress that fell had been built right on top of what had once been the city's shoreline. Scientists say Caltrans will need to take a close look at other roadways built on fill, especially the Oakland approaches to the Bay Bridge, the ramps leading on and off the bridge in San Francisco, called the Distribution Center, and, of course, the Embarcadero. The Cypress structure's double-decker twin, with concrete cracks to match, just like the ones that brought the Cypress down. The experts' advice, retrofit now.
All I can say is that at this point in time, what they're proposing to do for the Embarcadero structure is better than not doing it at all.
Engineers say they still have a lot of figuring to do. Specifically, they want to compute how much stress the Bay Area's double-decker freeways could stand once they are retrofitted. In other words, how much larger would the Loma Prieta quake have had to have been to bring even a retrofitted freeway down?
Scientists say they should have those calculations completed by April. In San Francisco, Gary Kauf for the 10 o'clock news.
It's not the first time this has happened, and the last time it caused quite a commotion. A Greyhound strike. At this hour, Greyhound drivers say the biggest bus company in the nation is already shutting down. Contract talks broke down, and drivers are now less than 1 hour away from a strike. Strike will affect 60,000 daily riders nationwide and thousands of commuters in the Bay Area. But in the Bay Area, people apparently aren't prepared. And the prediction is a bus strike here could develop into a major morning mess. John Fowler is standing by right now with a live report from the Greyhound Depot in Oakland. John.
That's right, Elaine, and here there are apparently some people who are already stranded by this strike, a strike that hasn't even officially started yet. Just a few minutes ago, Greyhound workers locked the doors to the terminal. Passengers bound for Los Angeles were told that they might not board the next bus out, even though the strike is set for midnight. Oakland is one of about 10,000 communities nationwide served by Greyhound, and for the vast majority of those, the bus is the only public transportation in and out of town. Greyhound is also vital to the San Francisco Peninsula public transportation system, a system that, too, is already being affected.
All the schedules are going to be starting to shut down at 10 o'clock. So they will stop rolling long before midnight. Those midnight schedules, some of the 11 o'clock schedules are not going to be met.
Samtrans hires Greyhound drivers to provide Peninsula service for 9,000 daily commuters. And Samtrans says it will stop routes between San Francisco, Palo Alto, Redwood City, and Daly City. Some are predicting a commuter nightmare tomorrow, especially since word hasn't really gotten out about the strike.
I don't heard about it. I don't hear about it.
You're not prepared for it?
I might take the BART.
They still have the 5L running, I know that, so I can get to the BART station.
I've already made inquiries with Carpool and Vanpool.
I'm glad I don't ride very much, just once in a while.
Caltrain is planning to add extra cars, and Samtrans says it will add extra buses on some feeder lines. Samtrans has set up some phone lines to give more detailed information. The strike issue is pay. Drivers say they're making $2 an hour less than they were 7 years ago when new owners took over, demanded and won big pay cuts and other concessions after a strike that lasted a month and a half. The company says it has just barely turned a profit this past year after losing millions and is offering about a 7% raise, but cannot afford the 33% the drivers want. Greyhound has been hiring and training replacement drivers, at least 600 of them, but there are some 6,000 drivers nationwide. Greyhound says that it will try to have some limited service in the next couple of days and hopes to be back to near normal by the end of the month. Drivers are scoffing at that, saying without experienced drivers and mechanics, there's no way that the bus company can run. Now, we should make clear that not all Samtrans buses are affected. Call Samtrans to get the detailed information that you need to get to work in the morning. But nationwide, it appears that tens of thousands of people all over this country are going to have to leave the driving to someone else. Dennis? Elaine?
John, you've covered these Greyhound strikes before. You want to venture a guess? Do you think there'll be an 11th hour settlement?
I would doubt it. They went 48 days last time, and there was a lot of rancorous name-calling on both sides. It appeared to be a pretty tough strike. I've talked to some of the workers who are affected by this strike, and they are very adamant that they will not accept the company's offer, and the company is also adamant that it will not up its offer. They're miles apart.
Okay, John, thanks very much for that live report. In Dallas today, a federal jury found 5 white supremacist young men guilty of racist attacks. The 5 men ranged in age from 19 to 25. Each of them was found guilty of 2 counts of violating the civil rights of minorities. They identified themselves as members of the Confederate Hammerskins skinhead group, and they were accused of a series of attacks on blacks in a Dallas park and of vandalizing Jewish institutions. Each of them now faces 20 years in prison and $500,000 in fines. The prosecution said this should send a clear message to other hate groups.
That this should send a warning across the nation that young racists who believe and advocate violence, they can believe what they want and say what they want, but they better not conspire to vandalize and commit violence, or they'll be prosecuted.
Several other skinheads who said they are not racists were on hand for the trial. Some of them testified against the 5, and after the guilty verdicts, they applauded. Andy Rooney returns to CBS's 60 Minutes this Sunday night after serving less than 1 month of a 3-month suspension. CBS suspended the commentator for allegedly making racial remarks to a reporter for a gay newspaper. The CBS spokesman said Rooney will discuss the whole situation on Sunday night's show. CBS News President David Burke said it's time Andy returned to his proper place on 60 Minutes. What Mr. Burke didn't say was why it was time, or if it had anything to do with the fact that the show America's Funniest Home Videos grabbed a bigger audience than 60 Minutes last Sunday night. During Rooney's absence, 60 Minutes has slipped in its overall ratings. CBS is no doubt hoping we'll all tune back in to hear what Andy Rooney has to say about his suspension and then continue tuning in. Still to come tonight on the 10 o'clock news, is the flight path out of San Francisco Airport a good place for a high-rise hotel? Sounds like an easy question to answer, but so far it hasn't been. And up next, we'll have a special report from a California town devastated by an earthquake more than 6 years ago. Has Coalinga come back? We'll be right back. It has been almost 7 years now since a strong earthquake struck a small Central California town that many people had not even heard of before then. Coalinga, about halfway between San Francisco and Los Angeles. The date was May 2nd, 1983. The magnitude was 6.7, big enough to leave Coalinga in ruins. Well, since then, much has been done to help the city and its people recover. But today, all these years later, the recovery is still not complete, and in some ways, it will never be. Randy Shandobil has a special report tonight from Coalinga.
Through the haze, you can see it. A lonely road leading to a town where there is nothing to do. Welcome to Coalinga. Even before the big quake of 1983, this oil-filled town was slow. Now it doesn't seem to move at all. Only the clock tower chimes break the silence. What do you think of the downtown area?
It's a ghost town.
About 7,000 people lived in Coalinga the day the ground shook, and the earthquake affected everyone. It killed no one, but it leveled the downtown area, destroying 56 out of 61 buildings there. Of the city's 2,600 homes, 2,000 suffered extensive damage. 342 were destroyed.
Started going this way and this way, and then it was just like it was twisting down. And man, I'm going every way. And instead of stuff falling out of the cupboard, they were thrown, just like someone had thrown them across. The floor was just really a working. I was praying. I was scared, and I was really praying.
Bus driver Cleona McCormick is one of the thousands of people here who started recovery in a tent. Then she and her family of 5 spent a year in one stuffy motel room. An unscrupulous house builder, one of the many vultures who ripped off Coalinga after the quake, skipped town with the McCormick's insurance money. So the family moved into one of the hundreds of small government trailers to wait yet another year. Now, finally, the McCormicks have a nice new house, but things are not normal.
I still go to bed with my shoes sitting right there where I can slip right into them should we have an earthquake at night. I live in fear every day.
driving down the